Right now, somewhere in your immediate social circle, there is a person who observes you with near clinical accuracy. They don't just hear your words, they track the micro oscillations in your vocal tone, the 3 millisecond delay in your smile, and the subtle shifting of your weight when you lie. In popular culture, these individuals are labeled super empaths. But from a behavioral intelligence perspective, they are high-sensory human scanners, possessing an elevated capacity for pattern recognition and subconscious reading. Most people believe an empath is fragile, a gentle soul easily crushed by the harsh realities of the world. That is a dangerous tactical error. A super empath doesn't just absorb emotion. They process human behavior at a structural level. They allow people into their inner orbit, giving second, third, and fourth chances because their system is hardwired to seek alignment and potential. They will forgive disrespect, broken promises, emotional volatility, and selfish outbursts. They will analyze your childhood trauma, rationalize your flaws, and absorb your toxicity long after a normal person would have walked away. Because of this, covert manipulators, narcissists, and everyday opportunists make a fatal assumption. They assume patience is weakness. They assume endurance means immunity. They are wrong. There is a precise behavioral line, a single covert emotional mistake that triggers an immediate, irreversible neurological shift inside a super empath. It isn't an argument. It isn't a betrayal of trust in the traditional sense. It isn't even an insult. When you commit this specific mistake, something inside their brain flips. The empathy network completely shuts down, replaced instantaneously by an ice-cold, analytical baseline. They don't throw a tantrum. They don't scream. They don't fight back. Instead, they execute what behavioral science calls an absolute door slam. You become a ghost to them while standing in the exact same room. If you have ever wondered why someone who once cared for you deeply suddenly looked at you with eyes like black glass, or if you suspect you might be the one carrying this fatal boundary inside yourself, you need to understand the mechanism behind this shift. In the next few minutes, we are going to dismantle the exact psychological dynamic at play. You will learn the hidden threat matrix of high empathy minds, the specific trigger that renders you permanently erased from their lives, and the subtle behavioral cues that signal you have crossed the point of no return. If you leave before understanding this core mechanism, you risk making this exact mistake in your most vital relationships without ever realizing you've done it, until the silence becomes permanent. Every human being walking the earth operates on a covert baseline of behavioral expectations. We teach people how to treat us, and in turn, we establish invisible guardrails around our psychology. But when you examine high-sensory individuals, specifically those operating at the extreme end of the empathetic spectrum, those guardrails are constructed very differently than the average person's. An average person reacts to emotional injuries in real time. You cross them, they raise their voice. You betray them, they confront you. Their anger is warm, chaotic, and loud. A super empath does not operate on warm chaos. They collect data. When you enter the orbit of a super empath, they give you the keys to their psychological vault. They share their deep reflections, their past wounds, their vulnerabilities, and their rawest truths. They do not do this out of naivety. They do it as an act of nonverbal calibration. They are testing whether you view vulnerability as a sacred trust or as tactical real estate. Most people fail small tests along the way. You flinch at their honesty, you forget a detail, or you show temporary selfishness. The empath absorbs it. They rationalize it. They run a subconscious calculation that says, this person is flawed, but their intent is not malicious. And so, the rapport remains intact. Which brings us to the core issue. What is the one mistake that instantly destroys that rapport forever? It isn't infidelity. It isn't anger. It isn't even leaving. The one mistake a super empath will never forgive is the intentional weaponization of their vulnerability for psychological leverage. Let me break down what happens in the human brain when this occurs. Imagine you're in an argument or a moment of conflict. You feel cornered, or perhaps you want to assert control. So you reach into the file cabinet of everything the empath has ever trusted you with. You take their deepest secret, their greatest childhood shame, or their most fragile insecurity, and you deploy it like a tactical flashbang. You use it to make them doubt themselves, to gain the upper hand, or to force their submission. In that exact microsecond, a catastrophic event occurs inside the empath's neural architecture. Their brain instantly reclassifies you. You are no longer a partner, a friend, or a loved one who made a human error. You are now designated as a predatory threat vector. The human nervous system has a hardwired defense mechanism called emotional habituation. But in a super empath, weaponized vulnerability triggers an immediate total shutdown of the mirror neuron system regarding you. The warmth that once flooded their eyes vanishes. The hyper-attunement they used to anticipate your needs instantly converts into hyper-vigilant observation of your tactics. They will not scream at you. They will not give you the satisfaction of a reaction. Why? Because a reaction requires emotional investment, and you have just been completely zeroed out of their emotional balance sheet. When you weaponize what was given in trust, you don't just break a rule, you demonstrate that your core character is unsafe. You prove that your empathy was a mask, and your intimacy was an intelligence-gathering mission. And that is why there is no recovery. You can offer performative tears. You can cite stress, alcohol, or past trauma. You can bring gifts and write letters. But to a super empath, those are merely continued tactical maneuvers from an active threat. The door hasn't just been locked, the structure itself has been dematerialized. If you have a high empathy individual in your life, recognize the immense gravity of the trust they extend. Their softness is not a lack of armor. It is a conscious choice to lower their shields in your presence. Respect that space. Honor what they reveal to you in confidence. Because the moment you use their heart as a weapon against them, you lose access to it permanently. Most people operate under the fundamental misconception that patience is a bottomless reservoir, particularly when dealing with highly empathetic individuals. We look at someone who repeatedly absorbs disrespect, excuses bad behavior, and offers continuous grace, and we project our own shallow understanding of endurance onto them. We assume that because their capacity to endure emotional turbulence is massive, their tolerance must be infinite. This is not just a misunderstanding of human behavior, it is a critical diagnostic error. A super empath does not possess endless patience. What they possess is an extraordinary high-capacity emotional processing system that operates on a silent, highly sophisticated, and continuous cumulative tally. While an average person functions on a transactional scale, reacting instantly, venting heat, and clearing the ledger with every minor infraction, the super empath processes human interaction like an intelligence-gathering operation. They do not react to the first offense, nor the 5th, nor the 20th, because their internal system is designed to give maximum margin for human error. They analyze context, stress factors, childhood conditioning, and environmental triggers. They actively look for reasons to justify your poor behavior, effectively performing the emotional heavy lifting for both parties in the relationship. This gives the outside observer, especially a manipulative one, the dangerous illusion of impunity. You begin to believe that your actions carry no real consequences because the boundary line never seems to materialize. What is actually happening beneath the surface is a structured aggregation of behavioral data. Every passive-aggressive comment, every subtle violation of trust, every micro-betrayal, and every instance of emotional exploitation is not forgotten. It is indexed. It is categorized not with hot anger, but with objective clarity. The empath's internal ledger is quiet, invisible, and absolute. They are tracking patterns, not isolated events. They are observing whether your missteps are genuine human lapses or systematic exploitation of their soft posture. While you perceive their silence as compliance or helplessness, their brain is systematically running a cost-benefit analysis on your presence in their life. The danger of this cumulative tally system lies in its silent nature. Because the super empath rarely gives loud warnings or dramatic ultimatums, those who cross them are completely blind to the approaching threshold. You assume the baseline is stable simply because the atmosphere remains calm. But that calmness is not peace, it is evaluation. The toll is rising silently in the background, microfraction by microfraction. When the capacity limit of that high-level processing network is finally reached, the entire ledger closes at once. There is no negotiation period, no warning shot, and no secondary buffer. The illusion of infinite tolerance shatters instantly, revealing that what you thought was a weakness to be exploited was actually a finite window of grace that has permanently run out. To truly understand why a super empath cuts ties so definitively, you have to dissect the exact mechanism of the infraction. Weaponized vulnerability. When an individual opens up to a super empath, a profound psychological exchange takes place. High-capacity empaths do not exchange small talk. They trade in raw human truth. They reveal their deepest insecurities, their historical scars, their private anxieties, and the precise layout of their psychological shadow. They hand over the structural blueprints of their psyche not out of foolishness, but as an offering of absolute trust. They do so operating on the unspoken contract that this information will be handled with radical care, held in a sacred, protected space where safety is guaranteed. The fatal error occurs when a partner, friend, or associate decides to convert that sacred trust into tactical leverage. This rarely happens in moments of calm. It happens during moments of friction, argument, or power struggle. In an attempt to regain control, win a debate, or force the empath into submission, the other person reaches directly into that vault of shared secrets. They take the empath's private admissions, a childhood trauma, a deep-seated fear of inadequacy, a past failure, and hurl it back as a projectile. They use that intimate knowledge to make the empath doubt their own perception, to inflict maximum emotional damage, or to destabilize their standing in the interaction. What the perpetrator sees in that moment is a short-term victory, a quick strike to win an argument. What the super empath experiences is a fundamental violation of the human contract. In behavioral terms, you have taken a non-combatant offering of surrender and turned it into an ambush. You have demonstrated that every moment of closeness, every shared tear, and every quiet confession was not treated as a bond, but cataloged as ammunition for future warfare. The act itself reveals a terrifying level of internal calculation. It proves that even in your moments of apparent affection, a part of your brain was calculating how to use their soft spots against them should the need arise. This specific action is unforgivable because it destroys the premise of safety entirely. A super empath can tolerate your bad moods, your selfishness, your stress-induced outbursts, and your unrefined habits, because those are flaws born of human imperfection. Weaponized vulnerability, however, is an act of deliberate malice. It requires intentionality. It demands that you take something sacred, given to you in confidence, and warp it into a tool of destruction. The moment that line is crossed, the empath recognizes that keeping you close is no longer just emotionally draining. It is fundamentally unsafe. You have proven that you will use their own heart to destroy them the moment it serves your ego, rendering any future intimacy impossible to maintain. When weaponized vulnerability occurs, the psychological shift inside the super empath is not emotional, it is neurological. To understand this, you must look at how an empathetic brain functions during normal interpersonal interaction. Under baseline conditions, high-sensory individuals rely heavily on their mirror neuron network and limbic system. They operate in a state of continuous limbic resonance, a neurobiological state where their nervous system actively attunes to yours. They feel your emotional distress, mirror your physiology, and naturally prioritize connection, harmony, and mutual understanding. This neurological state is what makes them soft, accommodating, and deeply engaged in your emotional landscape. However, the moment a sacred boundary is crossed through weaponized vulnerability, that limbic resonance is instantaneously terminated. The human brain is hardwired for survival, and when intimate trust is transformed into a direct threat, the empath's nervous system perceives an acute psychological breach. The brain initiates an immediate high-speed recalibration, shifting executive function away from the limbic system and transferring operational control directly to the prefrontal cortex and amygdala's threat detection circuits. This is the neurological flip. It is a rapid transition from emotional resonance to cold, clinical executive detachment. In an instant, the neural pathways responsible for compassion, mercy, and relational attunement go dark regarding you. The empath's brain no longer views you as an extension of their relational sphere. It reclassifies you strictly as a tactical threat vector. Where there was once fluid, warm empathy, there is now an immediate wall of analytical assessment. The prefrontal cortex takes complete control, processing your actions, your words, and your body language with absolute objective detachment. They are no longer feeling with you, they are analyzing you. Every phrase you utter, every micro-expression you display, and every performative attempt at justification is routed through a cold filter of behavioral verification. This neurological state change alters how the empath processes your presence. You become an object under evaluation rather than a human being in connection. Their mirror neurons stop firing in response to your distress, effectively cutting off your ability to manipulate their emotions or trigger their natural instinct to comfort you. You can cry, apologize, or attempt to leverage past intimacy, but those signals are now hitting an impenetrable neural barrier. The empath is observing the mechanics of your panic without absorbing any of its emotional weight. This total neurochemical shift is permanent because the brain, having registered a profound breach of psychological safety, locks this protective baseline in place to prevent future structural damage to the self. The manifestation of this neurological detachment is what behavioral science observes as the absolute door slam, a state of complete emotional and relational extinction. Most people are accustomed to dealing with hot anger, a reactionary, volatile state characterized by raised voices, dramatic confrontations, and emotional chaos. Hot anger, despite its destructive appearance, is actually an indicator of high engagement. When someone screams at you, argues with you, or demands explanations, they are actively trying to bridge a gap. Their nervous system is still invested in the outcome of the relationship, desperately fighting to repair a fractured boundary or force a change in your behavior. Hot anger seeks resolution, connection, and recalibration. The cold disconnect produced by a super empath is the absolute antithesis of hot anger. It contains zero heat, zero drama, and zero desire for engagement. When the door slam occurs, you do not receive an explosive reaction. You receive total behavioral silence. The empath stops arguing, stops explaining, and stops attempting to correct your perception. The energetic supply that previously fueled the relationship is severed instantly at the root. In psychological terms, you experience the terrifying phenomenon of total extinction. Your actions, your words, and your presence no longer generate any emotional feedback loop whatsoever. This reaction is so disorienting to manipulators because it strips away all their leverage. A person who uses emotional tactics relies entirely on getting a response, whether that response is guilt, panic, anger, or defensiveness. But when the cold disconnect activates, every tactic you throw at the empath falls into a vast, silent void. If you attempt to provoke them, they look at you with clinical neutrality. If you attempt to apologize dramatically, they observe your performance as if watching a film in a language they don't speak. You are no longer granted access to their internal state, their thoughts, or their vulnerability. The physical reality of this shift is unmistakable. You are completely erased from their priority list while standing in the exact same room. Their body language shifts from open, expressive, and soft to contained, deliberate, and entirely self-contained. The eye contact, which once held deep warmth and intuitive understanding, becomes flat, observant, and impenetrable, resembling black glass. They don't block you out of petty malice or a desire to punish you. They disconnect because you have ceased to exist as a safe variable in their reality. You become a background object, a statistical reality to be managed with minimal operational effort. There is no second chance offered, no probation period, and no path back into the inner sanctuary, because the person who once loved you has quietly, completely, and permanently evacuated the space you shared. Once this internal shift occurs and the cold disconnect takes hold, the change in the super empath's relational framework becomes absolute and permanent. The person on the receiving end of this door slam often struggles to grasp the finality of the situation, assuming that time, space, or persistent persuasion will eventually restore the old dynamic. They operate on the assumption that human relationships are naturally elastic, that no matter how far a bond is stretched or strained, it will eventually snap back to its original shape once the emotional storm passes. But this assumption completely miscalculates the structural nature of the empath's decision. The activation of this boundary is not a temporary emotional retreat. It is the establishment of a permanent new baseline. To a super empath, attempting to rebuild trust after an act of weaponized vulnerability is an exercise in pure irrationality. Their system is engineered around probability, pattern recognition, and survival. Once you have demonstrated that your internal character permits you to take their sacred disclosures and turn them into weapons during moments of conflict, that data point is permanently encoded into your psychological profile. No amount of performative remorse, grand gestures, tearful apologies, or promises of personal transformation can delete that historical reality. They do not view your post-incident behavior as a sign of genuine change. They view it as secondary tactical maneuvering designed to regain access to a resource you lost. The permanent baseline means that the bridge back to intimacy is not merely broken, it has been completely dismantled from the foundation up. You are locked in a structural containment protocol. If circumstances force the empath to remain in your physical environment, such as in a shared workplace or co-parenting situation, they will interact with you using absolute, unflinching civil detachment. They will answer your questions directly, fulfill necessary obligations, and maintain baseline social politeness. But the warmth, the intuitive connection, and the deep emotional access are gone forever. You have been permanently downgraded from an insider in their life to a transactional acquaintance who is monitored with vigilant, quiet scrutiny. This non-negotiable reality often drives manipulators and former partners into a state of intense frustration because they find themselves dealing with an invisible, immovable wall. Every attempt to reignite the old emotional spark or draw out a passionate reaction fails completely against the calm, impenetrable shield of the new baseline. The empath does not hold a grudge, nor do they waste energy harboring active hatred or bitterness toward you. Hatred is still an emotional connection, a tether that requires active energy to maintain. Instead, they settle into a state of total indifference, a complete, quiet release that locks you outside their personal vault for the rest of your life.